Lead the Team Nation, welcome back to another great episode coming your way today. Mike Evans, co-founder of Grubhub. And yes, I'm talking about that Grubhub, the leading online and mobile food ordering and delivery marketplace. Right now, they're up to like 32 million active diners. Today, he is CEO of Fixer, building the right now handyman service. They respond to customer requests in less than an hour with skilled, friendly workers. And he's also author of Hangry, which I can personally relate to. A startup journey in his memoir about starting a Grubhub and running it through all the way to IPO. Whoa, Mike, welcome to Lead the Team, sir.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Man, I had fun going down the rabbit hole today, including finding out things in our research like you're allergic to bees.
Oh, yeah. In the book, Hangry, I sort of tell two stories. One is the sort of creation of Grubhub. And then the second is after the IPO, I ride my bike across the United States. And there was a point in Kentucky when I was cycling and I got stung by a bee like right under my eye and my like whole face swelled up. It was uncomfortable, to say the least.
Oh, the things we learn about ourselves when we're taking a journey across America on a bike.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I recommend everyone to do it. Not that many people do, but more than you might think.
All right. So I want to dive into your book here in a second. But I got to say, one of these like cool things I found out is if I'm ever going to bike across America, I will 100% choose a recumbent bike based on your blog advice.
Well, thanks. I mean, the idea behind it was recumbent bike. It's not that different from a normal bike, but you're sort of a little bit more upright. And so you just see the country. You're just looking at the horizon instead of looking at the ground. That was it. That was the whole reason I picked this. I wanted to actually see the country I was riding across. So it was a good move.
Yeah, I thought it was great. And I never thought about that, but it makes no sense. Now I've seen those people on their recumbent bikes going down the road. And I'm like, why in the world are they doing that? And you said it wasn't for comfort. It was because I don't want to stare at that line as I'm crossing across America.
That white line on
the world
shoulder. Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of how you run your career a little bit. Looking at taking a long-term perspective with your adventures, and we'll dive into some adventures, riding your bike, founding these companies based on really a sort of a heart and soul approach. I don't know. It just seemed very aligned with all that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea that it's very easy to get caught up in the short term and get caught on a hamster wheel, no matter what business or what your activity.
Looking at that line.
It's easy to get caught up in it. And so this idea of like taking the long-term approach, making strategic decisions that have long-term dividends instead of short-term makes sense. Now, in the meantime, if you're running a business, you can't let the bank account balance drop below zero. The banks don't like that. So it is a mix. It's not an entirely long-term approach. Like it's a mix, but I tend to bias a lot more towards the long-term thinking.
It feels that way. And I'm glad to hear that. That's how you perceive it too, because it really comes through. I want to read just really quickly the description of your book, which I think will intrigue readers. So Mike Evans wanted a pizza, but getting a pizza was a pain in the neck. Insightful and hilarious Hangry, his book, candidly follows Mike's personal journey from the excitement of creating something new to the satisfaction of changing the way America eats. And then ultimately to the horror of seeing Grubhub turn from its roots to become a byword for exploitation in the restaurant industry. Increasingly suffering from anger and frustration, Mike rage quits the company he started, leaving it all behind to ride a bike across the United States in a long shot attempt to regain his sanity and find a new purpose. Did you find your sanity or regain your sanity and your purpose?
I got some of it, not all of it. Yeah, I mean, the sort of the conclusion of the book is not poor me. I wish it hadn't gone this way. And, anyone can take out the world's tiniest fiddle because obviously I got a financial return from the IPO at Grubhub as well, even though I didn't really like the way the company was going at the time I left. But this spoiler is not much of a spoiler. The conclusion is not like why me, but what now? Like, what am I going to do now to make the world a better place? What am I going to do with the resources that I have, which are significant after the IPO? And not just dollars. I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about people I know and the investors I know and the things I've learned. Like, what am I going to do with it? And the answer ultimately becomes, I launch a new company that's focused on creating an entry path into the trades. So we train people from scratch, they're full-time employees, to go do maintenance in people's homes. And it creates an entry path environment in a society where the average age of tradespeople is in mid-50s in most of the trades. And so it's desperately needed. We're sort of headed towards a really dangerous situation from a nationwide perspective in terms of entry point into the trades. And so that was the sanity I got back, was like, well, do something about it. Don't just bitch about it. Do something.
Yeah. A call to action.
Yeah.
On that. What was it like, just from a listener's perspective, having your baby, like not your baby, but your baby Grubhub, grow up in a way that wasn't really aligned with your leadership vision? I mean, you took it to a certain point. I mean, but it changed, I guess. But
yeah. At the time of the IPO, I think we had 65,000 independent restaurants on the platform, and we had, up until 6 months before the IPO, we had 0 chains. It was entirely independent restaurants. And so for the 12 years I was there, through the housing crisis, the 06, 07 housing crisis, like, we helped keep a lot of restaurants in business and really helped them thrive.
Yeah.
And that was so satisfying. And to some degree, the company still does that, but there is so much pressure for public companies to make a financial return at the cost of everything else, including their own future and including their customers' welfare. There's it's not just financial return at any cost, but it's short-term financial return at any cost. And so I just don't know how public companies resist that temptation and stay a long-term going concern for a decade or 2 decades or 5 decades, unless you can really, really have a strong drive towards this idea of the thing that we do is we create customer value. And we just so happen to make money on the side when we do it. And when you lose sight of that, which is very hard not to, I think that ultimately companies end up not differentiating, they become more exploitative, and it just gets really hard to actually be competitive even.
So going back to the frustrating pizza piece, what was the initial vision that you had for the organization in terms of how it would be?
Yeah, I didn't have a grand plan for world domination when I started. I literally just wanted a pizza. Like, I was hungry, and it was such a pain in the neck to go to the yellow pages, and then, you're not going to believe this, call on the phone.
No.
And even nowadays, I still see people say, well, what's the big deal just calling on the phone? And the first time, you have to look at that phone number, you get put on hold, somebody takes your credit card number over the phone. They get the order wrong because it's very hard to transcribe that correctly. There's just a lot of things that go wrong with that system. And so at first it was just discovery. It was a search engine for food because Google hadn't gotten there yet, right? It was just trying to find the restaurants that delivered to me. And then it quickly morphed into online ordering because that was just an easier way to run a business. And so that was the initial idea. I mean, I definitely wanted to start a business, but the problem I was trying to solve was very personal. I love pizza. I love it. I still love it to this day. I eat so much pizza. I have to run marathons just because I eat so much pizza. So, I mean, it was a personal problem, which can be good, which can be a great way to start a business, is to pick something that really just annoys you personally. I think that we'll see more and more startups doing things in the healthcare space just because the consumer, the patient experience, is so frustrating that I think people just want to solve that problem. It's such a behemoth to tackle, though. It can be really hard, but I think that's where businesses start typically.
How many pizzas do you eat a week? Just to clarify.
Now I'm down to just one.
Okay. At your peak, where were you?
I mean, 5. I was eating a lot. Yeah, especially when I was selling the restaurants. I walk into the restaurants and I'm pitching an idea, and they're like, well, do you want to try my pizza? And 100% of restaurateurs across the country think their food is the best. And when you're selling them, it's your job to agree with them. So you eat the pizza.
Yes, I have had it. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, it's hard to say there's a bad pizza. Have you ever had a bad pizza?
Yes, yes. Anything that's like a frozen pizza where
Oh,
the dough has to be made in-house for it to be a real pizza.
okay.
If
All
you
right.
if you buy the crust from Cisco, that's not a real pizza.
That's a strong endorsement for in-house made pizza dough right there. The
I mean,
founder of Grubhub perspective on pizza dough. Man,
when you're a pizza place, you have three ingredients. You have pizza sauce, dough, and mozzarella cheese. I mean, there's more ingredients, but
get it right. Yes.
but get it, like do it right. Do it. And you can tell the restaurants, I talk about this early on in the book. I talk about how hard it is to get new customers and how much better it is to have a good product where people just repeat. And the restaurant industry is brutal. It's something like 28% of restaurants close every year. And that without a pandemic, just on a normal year. And so the ones that survive are the ones that keep customers coming back because their product is really good. And you just can't take shortcuts with quality food and survive unless you do something with a chain where you have logistics systems and you have a brand and stuff like that. But like for independent restaurants, like the quality of the food is the thing that keeps people coming back.
And so taking a step back, taking a look at the book here, what do you think of that leg of the journey? What's the big leadership lesson for those folks checking it out?
Well, there's some specific lessons I have, and then there's sort of a larger meta lesson. And some of the specific lessons I learned is I didn't know a balance sheet had to balance when I started my company. Like I didn't get the business license till like 2 or 3 years in. I was making it up as I went along, selling restaurants, by day, programming at night. And I learned there's a bunch of rapid fire lessons. One of which I just said, which is repeat customers are far more better than new customers are very expensive to get. Repeat customers are much less expensive if your product is good.
Yeah.
So I learned that. I learned how to do sales, and that it has to do with creating a connection with people and listening first instead of just pitching them. And there's a few others, but like sort of the bigger lesson is my one of my co-founders at Fixer, Josh, he has this phrase he says, which is called be a tourist. When you go to a new town, like pull out the map and be the tourist and ask questions. Don't try to look like you know what you're doing, because if you're just willing to look like you need to learn, people want to help you and people want to give you advice, and they want to walk up to you and say, hey, can I help you find the best restaurant in town or the best whatever, the best like beach for your kids or whatever. And so this idea of like always ask questions, even if you look like an idiot. I've been in so many meetings where somebody's like pitching me something as an expert. I'm like, wait, what did those words mean? Like, I don't understand. Like, help me understand. And eventually you just learn so much, you end up becoming an expert in a lot of different fields. And so that sort of learning approach, the beginner's mind approach, was ultimately the thing that helped me keep leveling up as the business got harder and harder to run.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's also not being afraid to look like that, look like a learner. Even when people are looking at you as the senior leader in the room, and the expectation we feel a lot of time is we got to be the expert here. We got to have all the answers. But when you engage someone and have them explain something to you, it builds rapport in a relationship on a completely different level. They oftentimes feel a part of your success.
That's right.
I'm thinking like a restaurant who has good food, like the service isn't too good yet, and you're having to wait a long time for the food because they haven't figured out the service, and you just want to give them, sometimes if the food's really good, you just want to help them. You want to be patient with them. You want to give them a good review, even though they didn't nail every part of it, because the heart and soul is there to do a good job.
But the restaurants or any business, but for that, just to continue that example, the restaurants that are trying to figure out how to make this, they'll figure it out. The ones who are trying and putting the effort in to learn, they do figure it out. And that's true with every business. And there's another sort of corollary to this idea, which is if you're always willing to ask questions, everyone you work with, from vendors to people you're selling to employees to investors, if you're always willing to ask questions, they have to be prepared as well. Because if you're going to dig in on everything because you're curious, then people can't just sort of blindside you, just sort of snow over things with big words, right? If you're always investigating, You can't, there's nowhere to hide, right? So everybody has to be learning. You end up surrounding yourself with other people who are learners as well, because they also thrive in that environment.
Great learners attract other learners.
I think
And
that's
man,
true.
that's a great kind of leadership team to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Oh man. And so you go along in your journey and you close it out, you go to IPO, you take your bike ride across the country, you get stung by bees.
Yeah.
What did you take away from riding across America?
Well, I wrote a whole book about it, so it's going to be hard to encapsulate in a single question.
In
but,
one sentence.
I think one of the things that really struck me as I was riding across, this is not a business lesson. This is just a life thing that I learned. So, I would go into a small town in Kansas or in Missouri or wherever, and the people were unfailingly kind and generous and lovely. And, if you just look at the news, you wouldn't assume that's true. But if the news actually represented what's really happening in small town America, it's like, it'd be out of a 30-minute show, it'd be 29 minutes and 58 seconds of people being wonderful to each other and 2 seconds of people being horrible. But one of the things that was also interesting is when I would say, oh yeah, I'm going to this, I'm headed west. And they'd be like, well, that people in the town next door, they're okay. The next town, they're okay. But the town after that, they're weirdos. And there was this thing. And then we'd get there and they'd be wonderful people, right? And I'd get there and they'd be wonderful people. And they talk about the town that's the next two down, or the two that and so there was just this thing that happened where just people being from another place, just being a little bit distant, there was an assumption that they would be somehow different or unkind or not as hospitable. And it turned out to never be true. It turned out that in every town, people were hospitable and kind and wonderful. And so it just sort of taught me something about how we can have a pretty negative perspective about others. The people who don't look like us or don't live in the same town or have slightly different lives. But actually, when you get to meet them, unfailingly, in every case, they were kind, wonderful people and welcoming. And I know I had some privilege going into these towns. I'm a white guy. Like, I understand that I do look like a lot of the people that I was going into some of those towns. I'm not sure everybody would have experienced the same hospitality I did, but for the most part, we did, myself and the other people that I ended up riding with. And so it was just wonderful to just experience all of that kindness. I could have had a home cooked meal probably every night if I had just asked, right? Like, and people offered. People cooked me food, and it was an amazing experience.
That's powerful. It's even experiencing that once in your life can be powerful. But man, was that drilled home for you when you got to experience it time and time again. It reminds me of that quote that gets attributed to Abraham Lincoln, as many quotes. I have no idea if it's true or not, but I do not like that person. I must get to know them better. Have you heard that quote?
Yeah. Yeah.
Before? Was it Abraham Lincoln? I don't know. Could have been you.
I mean, it was humbling and I came into the whole experience with my own sort of set of preconceptions about how people were going to be that were blown away. I thought people were going to be pretty nice. Like, I thought it would be pretty nice, but I didn't expect the complete outpouring of grace and kindness that I received across the whole United States.
There's that, sometimes when I interview leaders, some of their advice is around assuming positive intent.
Yeah.
And they're working a lot of times to instill that in a company, especially when they're coming in and they want to do like a transformation.
So I would take that a step further and supercharge that.
Okay.
And I would say, live with intentional naivete. Even when you get wronged, assume the next time people are going to be wonderful. I've had employees in the past, steal, or I've had to deal with fraud or whatever. Like, and I've had to release features for websites where one time, we got defrauded in this one situation. It kind of stunk. And the next time I'm like, well, let's not worry about where the fraud's going to come from. Let's release the feature and then we'll solve that problem when it first happens. We can't write software and release features with the parking brake on. Like, we have to just do it. We have to do what's right for the 99% of our customers who will use this feature. And that sort of intentional naivete is, it's better than living with your guard up all the time. Like, I don't know how you live like that. And for the most part, people people don't take advantage of me or of leaders. And so I that positive intent concept, I totally agree with it. And I would take it even further and just expose yourself to risk, knowing that sometimes it will not come out well, but on the balance, and the end net is that when you give people opportunities and you let them try things and you don't worry about if things have failed in the past, it comes out positively far more often than you might expect. And so I think that cultivating an intentional naivete is actually pretty important.
Cultivating an intentional naivete. I have never heard that, but it's powerful. And I like that. For you, was that naivete something that's just inherent to how you showed up in the world, or was it instilled, or was there a moment for you that was, it really kind of brought it out?
I've had some really positive experiences where I gave people chances and they really turned out well. And I've had really negative experience where I prejudged and I missed an opportunity. And so I just evaluating that when I do the opposite, when I try to be very protective or when I try to be really conservative in the choices we make or in the innovation that we do in the companies that I've been involved with, you can really burn people by not trusting them, right? People don't like that. People like to have autonomy. They like to have responsibility. They like to be trusted to do the things. Like, people thrive in that environment. And so I think what happened is I unfortunately got to observe the results of the opposite when I wasn't giving people chances and certain opportunities. And I didn't want to keep doing that. And so it was I just learned from mistakes. It wasn't like I didn't show up in the world knowing this. So hopefully someone else can learn from my mistakes.
Born naive, and I figured it out at the age of 2. No, I like that, but it helps us understand, your process probably for a lot of your learning. And, CEOs, founders that write books, I think, have a very powerful or develop a powerful self-reflection muscle along the way. I got a good chuckle out of your a video I had watched where you said that writing a book was harder than launching a multi-million or creating a multi-million-dollar business or multi-billion-dollar
multi-billion
business.
Is what I said.
With a B, multi-billion-dollar.
I've done both. The book was harder.
Oh, okay. The book was harder.
Yeah.
And so, but your book is a memoir, so it's grounded in self-reflection.
Yeah.
Right. You also mentioned that you're a fan of therapy, and that can be a self-reflection, mechanism. What is your go-to self-reflection mechanism for your writing or for this whole idea of naivete?
I think it's important to be honest with yourself about results. It's what I'm doing working. Are the relationships that I have thriving? Am I treating people right? Am I being kind to myself? Is my business actually working? Is it actually achieving the goals that I set out? So I think it starts with this idea of being brutally honest when you're failing at things so that you can change something. If we just convince ourselves that something is working that's not, there's no opportunity to do better. And so it starts with this sort of just not sugarcoating the realities. And
specifically, you're saying for yourself, it's so easy to lie to ourselves as a leader about where we are personally, where a company is even.
I should also point out it's not a good idea to lie to investors or employees or customers. Okay. There's a lot of people you shouldn't lie to, but yes, yourself. Like start with yourself. Yeah. But
yeah, other people, it's not a good policy. Yeah.
But if you're not being honest with yourself about how the results are going, it can be easy to inadvertently shade the truth to other parties, right? To investors or customers or whatever. And so, but I'm not just saying like the general idea of like, be honest with yourself. Like, sure, that's true, but I'm talking about something more specific, which is be honest with evaluating the results. I'm very much a believer in setting goals, lifetime goals, annual goals in different areas of my life, and then just evaluating whether or not I'm actually hitting them, right? And I think that is it actually working is a really important muscle to work on. It's tough, and sometimes one of the things you have to say is it's not working. I'm not going to like beat myself up too much about it. Like tomorrow I'm going to make a plan to make it work. I'm not going to like take it as a moral failing that this thing isn't working. So the more honest you are with yourself about whether the results are happening, also the more grace you have to give yourself about giving yourself an opportunity to fix it, right? Instead of just sort of taking a shame out of that exercise.
Oof. That's a well thought out self-reflection exercise.
Thanks. The question is it working? Is
it working? But don't make yourself feel like, crap by shaming yourself through the results. Hey, when you don't hit it, be honest and move on and fix it versus kind of miring in it. It reminds me of another quote. It was Winston Churchill, something about sometimes you must occasionally look at the results, no matter how beautiful the strategy.
Yeah.
Pay attention in there.
I mean, I started a handy person business. Fixer is a handy person business.
Yeah, Fixer.com. Yep.
And it's what it started as, version 1. We're on like version 5, right? And version 1 it was a handy person service where if a toilet broke, we would show up and we would fix it. And we had a full-time employee. We still have a full-time employee workforce, not contractors. The full-time employee workforce.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we train people from scratch. The whole thesis of the business is that the supply of skilled workers is insufficient. And so we said, well, if we train them ourselves, then we can actually start to solve the consumer problems. So that was the thesis of the business. It worked well, and then a pandemic occurred, right? And so we have a business where we go into people's homes. And so, March of 2020, 85% of our revenue just went away, just disappeared, like in 1 week. Yes. And that's a pretty like horrible moment for a business, right? We've got, I don't know, at the time we had 65 employees. Like, I'm like, where are we going to get the money to pay these folks? I don't want to furlough anybody. And so we pivoted into a video consult product. And then that worked okay, but not great. It had great press, but we didn't make a lot of revenue from customers. And then we pivoted into a general contract relationship so that we could send people onto work sites that weren't homes. So we could go do work that we'd have to be worried about virus exposure. Yeah. And then we pivoted back to the original business model.
What a journey, man.
And then the strategy at every time made sense, but the results were like, well, this ain't working. Well, this ain't working. Well, this ain't working. And then now we're on a model that works. Ultimately, we end that was version 4. Version 5 was the thing that we do now is we do annual maintenance plans for homes where we show up every month and we do all of the maintenance associated with the home, both reactive and proactive, the things the customer wants, plus the stuff we know just has to get done at the home. And so that product has been much more effective than the sort of ad hoc, come fix my toilet. We still do that, but for the most part, most of our revenue, most of our hours, most of our jobs are for this home maintenance plans that we do. But it took 7 years to end a pandemic to get to this point. And a lot of moments were like, well, boy, it was a beautiful strategy, but I guess we have to look at the results. It ain't working.
Yeah. What's working is your self-reflection at the results, or your team's reflection, and that being brutally honest. And it sounds like to me that 85% that went away, you were figuring out a way to help the business survive, and you picked up a lot in all those different iterations. And then you went back to the original business model and then put it on steroids with the subscription model.
Yeah.
Which is so cool. And you're way more than just Chicago, right? That's where it started, but you're in other metropolitan areas around the country now.
Yeah, we're in Denver, Dallas, Phoenix, Seattle, and LA as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a dream. If you get
I'm trying to do this thing a second time. We'll see how it plays out.
Let's go. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool. Now you talk about using business as a lever for social impact, which to me sounds good. And I think a lot of businesses think, hey, this sounds good. We want to help use some of our proceeds or our profit to, for social good. And they kind of do it as a hobby sort of thing, for the business. But it sounds like you're taking a little bit different perspective on this.
Yeah, I think if the social impact or the societal benefit that your company is creating is a bolt-on, nice to have, it's also the first thing to go when times get tough. So it doesn't work. Yeah. And even philosophically, arguably, that those dollars should be returned back to investors so that they can do their own philanthropic exercises. And it's not the company's place to do it. There's an argument for me. I don't quite believe that, but there are people who believe that. Instead, what I'm a proponent of is, if you're going to do a start, so I don't know how you do this at a 100-year-old company, but if you're going to create a startup, if you're going to create something from scratch, find a business model where the actual execution of bringing value to the customer in and of itself creates societal benefit. So by way of example, Fixer, there's no way for us to do the work with the existing workforce in the United States. There are not enough people to go and create a home maintenance plan where we go and do the work for, let's call it 18% of the homes in urban areas in the United States, if that's our addressable market. So we have to create training programs, and we have to create an entry path into the trade. And then very quickly, the implication of that is that it has to be gender inclusive. Like, it's not just for guys, right? If you're going to try and create an entry path into the trades and increase the number of tradespeople, it would be really stupid to implement a strategy of just talk to men. And so we've created this whole funnel that finds people who are working at Target or Whole Foods or something like that, and they want a career instead of a job. And then they switch over, we train them from scratch. And we do a lot of on-the-job training, a lot of like in-the-home training. We partner people up in an apprenticeship model. And so the social impact that we're creating also gives us a huge competitive advantage from a business perspective. We have tradespeople. We have plenty of tradespeople in an environment where everybody says, I can't find people that work for me. We don't have that problem. We have plenty of tradespeople to do the work that we need to do. And so it's both a business advantage and a social impact. And so I think that that's what a real impact business is, where those two ideas can't be divorced. There are other examples of companies like this as well, but it's not a bolt-on thing. It's not a nice to have.
Yeah, instilling it early on, making it part of the business model. When you founded Grubhub, you obviously were not maybe in that point of view initially, but it was part because you were right. It was about independent restaurants initially. Is that correct from a societal standpoint? And helping small business thrive,
I think that was, so helping independent restaurants, I think, was also a huge competitive advantage, because it took us a lot longer to get that 65,000 independent restaurant base than other competitors like Uber Eats and DoorDash that came along. They started with chains because it was easier, right? And so it was easier to get 1,000 restaurants if you start with Pizza Hut, right?
Yeah.
And so we had a huge competitive advantage, and our customers really had a lot of the restaurants had a lot of loyalty to the service. And so I would argue that if the company had continued along that vein, it would have stayed differentiated, as opposed to nowadays, most people think of, I actually still think Grubhub is a better service and has better customer service, but like, and I'm honest with myself about that. It's not just that I created that company. And so, but I think that some of the differentiation has gone away as the company has lost that sort of lens. And so, it's one of the things that happens about being impact oriented, being thoughtful about how you're creating value for your customers first, not for your shareholders first. Take care of the customers first, and that brings longevity to a business. And I think that ultimately is beneficial to investors. So I think that there's room for this in a lot of businesses, thinking about, at the very least, not even necessarily thinking about societal benefit, thinking about customer benefit. Yeah. The idea that you exclude every benefit but shareholders is anathema to building good products, because you'll always take shortcuts. And so I think I just think thinking bigger than just the sort of really narrow lens of just shareholders ultimately creates better businesses, regardless of whether you take that all the way to where I have taken it, with societal benefit, with impact, or if you're just trying to keep customers happy for a long time. Like, that's regardless of what you think. If you think the stuff I'm doing is frou-frou, like whatever, this guy's crazy, like, at the very least, taking care of customers is a thing most business people can agree is a valuable outcome.
Yeah, that drives results at the end of the day, because they're paying the bills.
Right.
And yeah, what a great place to focus. And when you can meld it with societal benefit, even it's just sort of a virtuous cycle from that standpoint. Now, starting to wind this up a little bit, living intentionally through adventure. I don't know a lot about sailing, but you sure do. And I was like, man, this guy, he's like Grubhub, he's Fixer, he's riding his bike across the country. And not only are you sailing all over the place, you've built a crew, and you apparently have a documentarian following you around on your. So living intentionally through adventure, I consider the biking and the sailing falling in that category. What do leaders need to know about that?
Yeah, the sailing thing, the adventure that I took. So the next book will probably have this adventure in it. So I sailed a boat. I sailed a boat from France to the United States, to Chicago, all the way to Chicago, sailboat. And one of my friends, who happens to be a videographer, was on the trip, and so he did he did the video for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's something about, our scarcest resource. It's not dollars. And that's true for companies as well. I'm not even sure that it's time, which is a pretty obvious thing to say. I think our scarcest resource is attention. Like, where do we put our attention? And for companies, the reason why they have to stay focused is not because of the dollars, and it is because people's time, but actually, like, people can only be worried about so many things. So you want to keep the focus on this particular product with this particular customer set. And then in my life, it's also something very similar. Like what am I going to put my attention towards? And so relationships are the first thing for me, my wife and my daughter, and then my business is second. And then for leisure, I don't just like go to movies or whatever. I have this like team thing that I do with sailing, where like we go and race and we do all this stuff, but it's relationships and it's physical exercise, and it's sort of a lot of benefits all wrapped up in one. So that's why I picked it. It was a very intentional sort of choice. Plus it's fun messing about on boats.
Yeah, I love that. I love a lot about that. But one thing that really most resonates with me is people in life identifying their pastimes and hobbies and interests on finding intersections. And you just listed all 3 or 4 ways that sailing sort of meets your needs and brings into your life the right people and adventures. And for me, I think about tennis because it's physical. It takes my attention, like, and I enjoy deviating my attention from the work world onto the tennis court. I can't think about what's going on at work, even in my personal life, when I'm focused on the tennis court. And so I like the friendships with that. I've done a lot of training in improv, and that terrifies me every time. But I like the interesting people I get to meet. It allows me to sort of hone my speaking craft a little bit, and most importantly, it improves my listening.
Huh.
And so, yeah, I think finding those intentional places is a great lesson for every human being, not just leaders.
I just recently heard about a study that, like, I'm a runner. I do a lot of running. I do a lot of cycling. And just recently heard about a study that said the most longevity increasing sports that you can do are not running and cycling, but actually racket sports, because they force you to have relationships. You can't do them solo. You can't, like, I can just go for a run by myself, but I have to find a friend to play tennis or racquetball.
That's interesting. And it makes a lot of sense. It's not just even the playing, it's finding somebody and maintain that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think there's an increasing body of evidence that for longevity, for like, as you get into middle age or later age, it's actually the challenging social interactions that really keep us sharp. And so it's a strong argument for doing racket sports.
All right, y'all. Mike, we've got you're going to start your own pickleball league. And I'm
going to start slow. We'll see.
Start slow. Yeah. Well, now that you've cut down your pizza eating, you don't have to play quite as many sports or run quite as much, right? Because you're living healthier now.
Yeah, but it's I do, just from a mental health perspective, not from a physical health perspective. I mean, it's a good release valve to just go on autopilot for a little while and do sports and do physical exercise.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the greatest benefits to me too. I feel rejuvenated after having, even if I'm tired physically, I mentally feel refreshed. And I'll get a burst of clarity and sort of peace for 24 hours after a good tennis match.
That's awesome.
And then I'm looking for my next tennis match, calling people. Can you play? Can you play?
Yeah.
No matter where I'm traveling to. Well, Mike, what's your parting thought for our listeners today?
I would just say that intentionality is really important. The idea of having a personal definition of success, the idea of writing it down, telling it to other people, making it explicit, understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then actually evaluating whether you're approaching it is critically important. And then there's a third piece, which is if you're not approaching it, change something. Either change the goal or change your activity. And without any sort of like moral judgment, if this isn't working, well, maybe I need a different goalpost to shoot for, or maybe I need different effort. But like the idea that you just feel bad that you didn't meet goals doesn't help, right? So I think this idea of personally defining success and then evaluating is it makes for a very fulfilling life.
Oh, so good. Mike, thanks for coming on, lead the team today, sir.
Thanks for having me.